the Rambam explained exactly at what point is the appropriate point a person should be to be considered, relatively speaking, in an objective frame, perspective, to be able to maximize on one's free choice. The equidistant point between the both extremes. Because we're born with various tendencies and predilections and characteristics and attributes, we have to balance it. Now the question is, but how do you do it? Rambam is now going to teach us how, if we're off balance, how to get balanced. How does one condition himself in these various positive attributes, predilections, until it becomes second nature within the person? How does one achieve this? Yaseh v'yishne v'yishalish. Masim she'oseh. You should do it, repeat it 3 times. It's the ongoing repetition of doing something. Al pi hadeos ebtsoyos. Based on trying to achieve the midpoint, a person knows he's overly giving, which is not good, because naturally is that. You should restrain yourself. And only after you restrain yourself, you reach that point and you do your analysis, only then do you do the act of kindness. The Azvim Tomid. And you should repeat it many times on Achiyu Masem Kalam until it's easy to do. At first, it's difficult. There's always a resistance, because we resist because our tendency is to do differently. But if you repeat it enough, it becomes second nature to the point it's not difficult any longer. It's not considered a burden. And these attributes, these tendencies become fixed in his soul, in his mind, in his emotion, because it's become second nature. You know, a person who's in physical therapy, because he goes bent over, so he has to do certain exercises and he has to sit a certain way and walk erectly, forcing himself to be upright, and initially it's painful, because he's going against his natural bend. His natural posture is not in the direction which he should be. He has to be upright. So sometimes he has to force himself back on an ongoing basis, or sometimes you have to wear a brace. And the brace doesn't allow you to go forward. The body wants to go forward, but the brace doesn't allow you. Initially, there's pain. And as the body acclimates to this new posture and starts straightening, there's less pain, because there's less resistance. And same thing with our behavior. You know you're off to the extreme. It could be a very positive, but because it's unchecked and it's out of control, by repeating it multiple times in the opposite direction, to try to get that midpoint, it may be very time-consuming and focus-consuming. Your mindset has to be on it, otherwise you can't do it. But eventually, once the conditioning takes hold, it comes easy. You don't even have to think about it. You walk naturally upright. You naturally are not overly giving. You make that evaluation. I'll give you the example. And the Chofetz Chaim makes the point, but you can't appreciate what he says unless you do it. You study the laws of Shmir Saloshan. We studied it at length in the past. 14 positive commandments, 17 negative commandments. You could be in violation over time. And the Chofetz Chaim fleshes it out fully to give you an understanding. And initially, it's difficult because naturally we speak whatever comes to our minds. So every time before we speak, knowing based on our knowledge of studying what is reality, that everything comes out of our mouth, it's not appropriate, you're in violation, so you're more careful. And initially it's hard because you have to keep suppressing. Eventually, the tendency is not there any longer. You think before you speak, and you know what to think about, whether it is or not, and you hold yourself back. But you know something, nobody's perfect. I could tell you, Baruch Hashem, I've studied it many times, and I think I'm pretty good at it. Not to say things that I shouldn't say, but when nobody's perfect, once in a while you slip. When I slip, I know I slip, and I sense the wrongness of that slippage. It's only because I'm conditioned not to say things unless they're appropriate. So once in a while, something slips out. It doesn't meet the criteria of what you're permitted to say. I know it immediately. And because I know it immediately, I have a sense I want to correct the wrong. I don't want to go back there again. Because we're not perfect. But as much as we're not perfect, we have a sense of the wrong because we never normally do the wrong. As a result of that, I make the correction sooner rather than later for that reason. The reason why we procrastinate and do things later is because we don't appreciate fully the seriousness of it. I'll give you an example. Person gets a notice from the bank that if he doesn't pay the mortgage by a certain day, there's going to be foreclosure on the house. And he got this notice a year ago that in a year from now, if you're delinquent on your payments, we're going to foreclose. And the man didn't feel the urgency of paying the mortgage. Now, it's 3 days before that date. And they say, unless the mortgage is paid in 3 days, foreclosure, your house is going up for auction. That means he's going to be forced, the marshals can come force him out of the house. Now, because he senses, now that letter from the bank resonates totally differently. Within moments, relatively speaking, you're out, unless you act responsibly. So I'm saying a person who understands the ramifications and the negativity and the seriousness of saying something wrong, you pick it up immediately because you normally don't say it. But if a person just speaks, like we said before, ignorance is bliss. It's not so terrible. How do you know it's not so terrible? Because I've been speaking for years and it hasn't affected me negatively. I even pride myself. I'm a gossiper. You know, I peddle around this information. I go from person to person, and I get all kinds of attention for this. So that's tremendous value. But factually, not only does it have value, by peddling this kind of information, you're in violation of feeding other people information which you're not permitted even to listen to. So you're culpable for putting a stumbling block before a blind man. You're not permitted to do something to cause another Jew to sin, and you're in that position. So the one who listens, he doesn't understand, but you, whether you understand or not, you're the cause of the other person being in violation of many of these negative and positive commandments. These various appellations, Rachum, Chanun, merciful, gracious, all these appellations, God identifies with them, and there's a mitzvah to emulate God. And that is the middle path. That's the equidistant point that we're obligated to walk that path, to be gracious, to be merciful, to do many things which go against the grain. As a result of that, if you lived your life in that groove, that's called you're living your life derech Hashem, as God wants you. Avram Avinu lebonov, and this is something which Avram Avinu, the founding patriarch of Jewish people, taught his children. Shenemar, ki yedativ leman asher yitzav bonav achrav. I know why is Avram receiving the blessing? Because I know he will teach his children after him to do chesed and nishpat, to do chesed, kindness, and to be just and honest. That's why. Maybe tova ubroch latzmo. And one who does walk this path lives his life based on these values, these attributes, these characteristic traits. Why did God allow the blessing to come to fruition, to be actualized? Because he did exactly what he said he would do. And he lived his life in that manner. It's very interesting. The reason why he merited the bracha is because he lives his life, and the way he's living his life, that's exactly, he's emulating God. So therefore he merited, he's living his life b'derech Hashem, the way of God. Because the attributes he has, he's emulating God's attributes, and they became natural to him. There's a famous word from the Maral of Prague, before you start reading the Torah, Monday, Thursday, whenever it is, we all say a pasuk, V'atem advekim b'Hashem Elokechem l'chaim kulchem hayom. V'atem advekim b'Hashem Elokechem, you cleave to God, chayim kulchem hayom. And when you cleave to him, you're alive at the most advanced level. Chaim kulchem hayom, that's why today you're alive. So the Maral of Prague says, what's the source of all life? The source of all life is God. So if a person attaches himself to the source of all existence, all life, what are you doing? You're guaranteed life eternally. Because just as Hashem's eternal and you become part of his eternity, then because you're doving, when you attach yourself to him, that's the end result. So if a person lives his life as Hashem, emulating his characteristics, God is merciful, God is gracious, God is giving, God is that, whatever it is. By emulating, you're attaching yourself, you're identifying as him. When you identify as him, then you are effective as he's effective. As I said, commonality brings about compatibility. That's what happens. We have later the Rambam, the many appellations for God. One name of God is Yud Kei Vav Kei, which usually represents the attribute of mercy. And also the God is infinite. Then you have the name, it's spelled like master, same pronunciation, Adni. He's the master. Then you have a name, Shakai. These are unpronounceable names of God. Then you have Kale, and you have Elokim. Every name of God depicts him, how he relates to existence at that particular moment. Ani Hashem, I'm the merciful one. Whenever he says Elokim, that means he's precise in judgment. If God wouldn't use all these various appellations regarding himself, would we know exactly how God relates to this existence? We have no idea. And let's say in English, there's basically one word for God, G-O-D, or G-D. Lord. Those are only two words. What are other words there? But in Hebrew, and this is God's own characterization of himself. This Ko, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Adni, Kale, Elokim, Shakai, multiple. All these names. Well, it's important for us to know. You know why? Because as a result of him revealing how he's related to existence every moment, and there's a mitzvah to emulate him, so we have an obligation to emulate him in these various contexts, to be merciful, to be gracious, to be giving. That's the value of identifying himself in these various capacities, how he's relating that particular moment to existence. We once asked the question, it's the Ramchal's question. Usually a master, when he creates something, the product that he creates reflects on his mastership. To what degree is a master? Rembrandt's, his painting reflects the genius of him. Van Gogh, him. Every one of them, it's a reflection of who they are. If God is infinite, why did he create a world that's unlimited? The earth is the smallest sphere in existence. And yet it's everything, because that's where the human being dwells. I mean, God should have made the universe the equivalent of what? Of the sun, even bigger than the sun. Because God has the ability. The master always, when he creates something, it's a revelation of his capacity. So Ramchal answers, when God created the world, it wasn't to reveal his capacity. God is infinite. He created the world to be the setting for man's choice. And it's best for man to be in this environment, to meet his challenges, than be in any other environment. Only God knows. So it's not to show you who God is. It's to understand these are the necessities for the human being to make choices. These are the contexts. And as a result of that, if he succeeds, then it's a means to an end. If not, he's failed. But within those limitations, there's nuances of difference, of how God relates. And God tells us that's how it's relating. Why? Because it's important for us to emulate every one of the ways he relates at various times. To be merciful, to be gracious, to be exacting. It depends when. But if he would never reveal any of this, how would we know even how to emulate it? We'd have no idea. We say in the Amidah, first bracha, Hakel Hagodl Hagiba Nora. He's great, he's powerful, he's awesome. What do we say afterwards? Kel Elyon. What does Kel Elyon mean? He's the powerful one who's above it all. I mean, all these characteristics we speak about, Chesed, Rachmim, Din and Rachmim, this is the way he relates to this world. Do we have any idea who God is? We know God is infinite, no beginning, no end. But do we have any grasp of who he is? We have no idea. But he's merciful. No, he's only merciful how he relates to this existence. He acts with loving kindness. That's not who he is. That's the way he relates to this existence. He's precise. Who is he? Kel Elyon. He transcends this existence. He's advanced. So all the value of him identifying who he is and how he's relating, that's for us, not for him. Because now understanding that, in what context, now we know what to emulate.